Hey, this is Mike Lindsay from Vital MX, and today we are talking about probably the most sought after 250F in the field. We are looking at Monster Energy Star Yamaha Racing's YZ250F. Particularly, we got to grab Nate Thrasher's bike at Anaheim 1 to look over, and the reason being, we'll get into the video, is there was actually a difference between him and Colt Nichols' machine that lent us towards wanting to look at Nate's to explain out a little bit more of what the team has been up to. This engine has relatively been the same basic architecture since 2014 now. Yamaha themselves has thrown some good updates into it, but then the team themselves has been able to just keep taking these ideas year after year and rolling them over, along with adding in new ones. A big point we hear about with this bike is all the work they've done from the intake side. Even though it's got such a direct shot already into the engine, we've heard comments about them at one point running the YZ450 airbox and intake system instead of the 250, and at this point we believe they have modified it even further to something to use specifically for their application. The other item on the induction side of the engine that's talked about is the fact that the Star Racing team runs a dual fuel injection system. While this does come stock on the Kawasaki X250 and the Suzuki RMZ250, it does not come stock on the Yamaha, so the team has had to implement it later. So you have the standard fuel injector in the throttle body, and then upstream inside of the airbox area, they have another injector to pre-spray fuel in. In past years, we've seen it actually mounted on the back side of the air filter screen, pointing straight down into the intake, but we're unsure if that has changed at this point, because just spraying the fuel in early isn't everything that is what makes this power. It's also about how you're atomizing the fuel. So depending on if you're spraying it in sideways or at a certain degree angle, the air can also shear the fuel and create a different tumble effect as it rolls into the throttle body and later to the engine. Moving down into the engine itself, sad to say, this is one of the bikes in the field we maybe know the least about. Yes, the Star team has their own in-house engine guys. They work closely with Yamaha and they've developed this thing into a fire breather. We're sure they have their own head spec they've developed in-house. They either do it themselves in-house or they've gone to the point that they can send out and be CNC machine. We're not exactly sure. The piston itself comes from Wasner, but of course, as with any of these high-level teams, the piston is not the same thing off the shelf that me or you can get. It is designed specifically for this engine combination and for what the team is trying to accomplish. This is everything from if they've made modifications to the combustion chamber, what their deck height is, what squish they're looking for. This is designed specifically for this bike with Wasner's engineers and the team's race engine guys together coming up with the best combination. As for the cams, we know they're different, but we are not sure if this is still a part that they have sourced from Cosworth back when they used to work with them, or if it's even what you would call an OW part, which is Yamaha's term for a factory component. With Honda, we always say HRC components. Yamaha, you might hear us say a few times in this video the term OW, so the cam itself also might be provided by Yamaha. We aren't sure at this point. We do know that, of course, the camshaft has been changed, the valve train has been changed, and the valve springs. We also know the Star Racing team has worked with Recluse for many years on their clutch setup. They've done everything from their manual packs to their auto discs and combinations of each, and this has all changed depending on riders' feedback, the engine combination. This could have changed already, but the last time we checked, this is kind of what we know about their clutch setup. If the standard Yamaha has, say, like a 7 or an 8 plate clutch, meaning there's 7 or 8 fiber discs with also a similar amount of steel backing plates, then the Recluse torque drive kit might have 12 or 13 total fiber disc plate count. That's because instead of an aluminum fiber disc, so it's an aluminum plate with fiber material on it that's a little bit thicker, they can run a steel plate, making it much thinner to get the same strength out of it and put fiber material on that. This allows them in the same overall clutch pack height to run more plates, and that's where they've been able to get more torque capacity out of their clutches. However, with the amount of power that Star is making, sometimes just having a bunch of those extra plates in there can make the clutch too grabby and make the bike too stuttery coming out of corners. So while the consumer kit might have 12 or 13 plates, they have different thicknesses to offer the Star team. They may be running 10 or 11 plates in total in Supercross to try to still get the grab they need coming out of the corners, entering the whoops, but also make it a little bit smoother off the bowl corner so the bike doesn't feel as jittery when the clutch is applied, being engaged and disengaged. The exhaust system on this bike is provided by FMF, but as we usually mention in these videos, this is not the FMF system that me or you can go buy directly off the showroom floor. Once again, this engine has so much modification work done to it, and there's been so much thrown into this that the system they have is built specifically for their usage. This does not necessarily make it overall better for any Yamaha 250. More than likely, if you were to take their system and throw it on your stock bike, it would actually perform worse. But once again, that comes from the pipe diameters to the curves to the core length and diameter. All this has been massaged and perfected just for the Star Racing application. The team also works for Vortex for their ECUs. Everything on this is custom built mapping specifically for the application. The amount of time that a team like this will spend on the dyno to map the bike for every little mechanical change they make is insane, and that's a huge part of what makes these bikes run so crisp, so clean, and makes them so reliable and dependable for their riders. From the chassis side, the Star Racing team, as far as we're aware, utilizes a frame and swing arm that is exactly as comes off the showroom floor with no real extra gusseting or any modifications made there, albeit they do use different engine mounts. They've worked with Scott from Works Chassis Lab for a long time. Their front mount is made of titanium and it's a lot thicker than stock. Again, the version the team runs is actually a little bit stiffer than some of the versions available to the public. The Star Racing team has gone this direction, but they've had to change their fork setting to match it. Back when Will Hahn was still with the team, they did a lot of testing to come up with the final combination that gave these guys the front end bite and grip they were looking for. The suspension on the Star bike is unique, but also wouldn't shock people that they've really been running almost the exact same fork since 2013. Albeit the Yamaha is a bike that never came with an air fork at any point in time and always stayed with spring. The team since 13 has been running the PSF1 KYB air fork, the same version in 13 that came out on, say, the Cowie 450 or the Honda 450. Enzo Racing went through and adapted it to work on the YZ250F. Since then, the team has really just developed this package continuously. It's still the same basic cartridge, tubing, and fork lug that they used back in that season, but with the help of the in-house suspension technician Drew Hopkins, KYB staff, and the crew from Enzo Racing and Ross Maeda, they've massaged it to the point that everybody on the team loves this setup and this fork. Probably the trickiest part is the top of the mid-speed valve cap on this one does have a couple different adjusters. That's one item on it you really can't, it is not sold to the public, and it gives them the ability to separate and adjust high speed and low speed compression, while also offering them a different speed rebound adjustment at the top of the fork while retaining the rebound adjustment at the bottom of the fork as well. The shock body is basically the standard KYB shock body that comes on this bike, albeit coated. The team also adds an 18mm shock shaft for Supercross duty. The stock shock shaft is 16. If a lot of guys take the standard 16 in this bike, if they clip a triple wrong, some certain loads on the bike can actually cause the stock shaft to possibly bend. So the 18 is there, it's a little bit stiffer, it's just more built to handle the rigors of Supercross. The team works with Neckin for their triple clamps. In the past, we have seen them use their AirShock top triple clamp design. That really doesn't seem to be there anymore since they had a race, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it may have been J-Mart that crashed on the bike and tore one out of the clamp in a very severe Supercross crash. The team has kind of moved away from that and gone from a more standard solid mounted bar mount. It's very dependable, very low chance of any issues when on track, and they utilize a huge range of adjustment with bar risers as they have a lot of tall riders on the team. The team pretty much universally uses Pro Taper's Evo handlebar. You don't see really anybody on the team run a crossbar version or the Fusion. They all seem to go for the crossbarless Evo. Working with arc levers. Bob from Arc creates a lot of little custom tapers in these levers, different thicknesses, pretty much whatever any rider wants, and this gives the guys a huge amount of options depending on if they want it longer, shorter, a little bit more grip or texture to lever, if they want smoother, thinner. Pretty much the guys can have any option or choice they want. Another really unique item by talking about the air fork is the weight loss on this bike. The spring fork is about 2.7 to 3 pounds heavier than this PSF1 option, and this kicks off kind of something the Star team is very, very passionate about, is keeping this bike light. From what we are aware, they are right on the AMA legal weight limit, and that is a combination of these forks going through every single fastener on this bike and working with Race Tech Titanium to get, the optimized bolt they can for that area, whether it's got a little bit smaller head size, it's a little bit shorter, how they run flanging, where they run titanium on the bike, where they run aluminum fasteners, where they can get away with it. They do everything they can on this bike to keep the weight down. Foot peg brackets are made by them. Raptor Titanium provides their pegs. They don't even have the center row cleat in them. They take those out. Like I said, everything they focus on is we're gonna build the fastest motor in the class, and we're gonna build the bike as light as possible. An item that's visually outside the bike that does play into the performance package, and it's the reason we grabbed Nate Thrasher's bike instead of Colt Nichols, is the electric water pump on this bike. The electric water pump on this one looks very similar to the one on the HRC and the MCR bike that's built by XPR. We believe that they are all three running the exact same water pump from Bosch. As we've explained in other videos, the idea of doing this is by removing the mechanical impeller, the shaft, the seals, and the gear that is driven by the motor. You're reducing friction and power loss. Instead of the motor having to turn the gear and the shaft through these seals and turn the impeller through the water, which creates drag on the engine, they've removed all that from inside the engine and just blocked it off so the water just passes through its passages. The electric water pump mounted outside is what's producing the flow now. They're able to push that water through the engine using it. This allows the engine to be freed up and not lose power by driving another component of the engine, in this case, the cooling system. We have heard that on the Yamaha, it is maybe not as big of a difference as it is on the Honda or the Suzukis we've seen running it, based on how the stock water pump drive system is on the Yamaha. But the team is still elected to use it with Christian Craig and Nate Thrasher. But we've also seen that Colt Nichols, before injury, had opted out of using the system. There are a few reasons we could deduce that Colt Nichols opted out of using the electric water pump before his injury at A1 that ultimately cost him his Supercross season. A few reasons. Colt is a defending champion on the team, and he was the favorite coming into the season. By running the outgoing or current package without the water pump, he already knows what power characteristic it makes, how reliable it is, and it takes out a chance of having a possible DNF from a new component. Albeit this item does help the bike also run cooler, it's still an external force that could be torn off during a crash. The wiring to it's new. They've only been running it maybe for a few weeks or only a part of off season. So it comes into question, how's it going to deal with mud races, water getting in all the connectors? All these items bring reliability into question. Colt knows that the bike is fast enough as it is, or as it was, to win. So for him, it was maybe not worth taking the chance of running this item. Other than the increased power, it does slightly change the engine character, frees it up a little bit. And then on top of that, there is cooling benefits to this. The standard water pump, when mechanically driven, changes speed based off the operation speed of the engine. As the RPM of the engine goes up, the water pump runs faster. As the RPM drops down, the water pump runs slower. The electric water pump can run at max RPM at all times, improving water flow and cooling at low engine RPMs. Even more, after the team has done a sight lap, when it's sitting on the gate, they can actually flip on this water pump and keep it running to keep the engine cool. This allows the bike to cool down more after a hot lap, and this could overall assist them in keeping the bike in the optimal temperature range to create the most power. As we mentioned, really everything in this bike goes into weight savings and engine. We do find a few items on it that are surprisingly standard. The wiring harness on the bike is barely modified. The team entrusts the stock harness from Yamaha, as it is pretty decent quality, and they don't really add any data acquisition, so they haven't had to splice into the harness and add a lot when they go racing. Yes, they probably have a data acquisition bike when they test, but they seem to do less of it than most of the other teams that they are up against. Also, the front brake on the bike is surprisingly stock. The master cylinder and the caliper are the same that's on mine or yours bikes. They do play around with brake hoses at times in different rotor sizes, but you don't see a Nissan brake caliper or billet caliper on this like you see on the 450s with Tomac and Ferrandis. This could be a cost reason. Those calipers are really expensive, and to supply the entire 250 team with them would be quite a costly item out of the budget. There's a lot of other really cool aftermarket parts on this bike. They have a lot of great supporters, but we really wanted to dive into the tech and the nitty-gritty that makes this bike as good as it is. If you want to learn more though, check out vitalmx.com. We do a weekly Pit Bits feature where we check out everything that's new and changed on team bikes, their helmet, and their gear at every single race, because cool, we shot this bike, but man, teams are always bringing new stuff to the plate, and that's what that feature is for. So make sure you actually check out our website. And if you like this feature, subscribe to us, give us a thumbs up. It'll ensure that you're able to see more of these videos. Make sure you turn on your notifications so you don't miss more in-depth features as we go inside all the best factory, satellite, and privateer bikes this season. Thanks for watching.